Welcome to Campfire Football. I'm Sebastian North. The Premier League season has begun. We have gone past week 2. I've got 6 big questions for this season. It's always hard to figure out what's going to be the thing to watch before any games have kicked off. I always like to wait and see how teams are doing. And then there's also the whole issue of the transfer window. If it hasn't closed, there's still questions that need to be answered. We'll start with City, then we'll talk about Chelsea, then Spurs, then the pretenders, who are sort of the outsiders who are going to do well. Then we'll talk about the slight rule changes with stoppage time and bookings, and we'll wrap it up with injuries. So let's start with the champions. Manchester City have won the Premier League title 3 times in a row. They are going to go for their 4th, which would be a record. They've also won 5 titles in the last 7 years. Their dominance, especially under Pep Guardiola, has been quite stunning. And it all culminated in winning the treble last season, finally getting the Champions League trophy that had eluded them for so long. And I guess that's the question. After winning the treble, is there going to be a hangover? The squad has also started to turn over, so it's going to be very interesting to see if they can sort of carry on from what they did last season. They lost Riyad Mahrez and İlkay Gündoğan. Now, these are 2 players who, over the years, delivered. Riyad Mahrez was a tormentor on the right wing for such a long time, scored a lot of big goals in big games. And, of course, İlkay Gündoğan. As Kyle Walker said, he turned into prime Zidane at the right time of the season. Mateo Kovacic comes in from Chelsea. This is a highly experienced, highly technical player who probably won't have too much trouble fitting in. Josko Gvardiol follows him for a huge chunk of change, but he's one of the highest rated center backs in the world, and he's young, so he'll be around for a while. Obviously, the biggest concern for Manchester City is Kevin De Bruyne is already out for an extended period of time. But this is a good season for Phil Foden to really step into the fore. I think a lot of people are asking, are City going to be just as good as they were last season? Well, they probably won't be better, but I imagine they'll be in the title race come April. They'll probably be in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and they're going to go deep in at least one of the 2 domestic cups. That's just the way they roll. Really, what it comes down to in terms of how much silverware they pick up is how good is the competition and if they suffer any real serious injuries at really the wrong times. Like Erling Haaland, for instance. For City, it really is a case of enjoy Guardiola while you have him, because once he leaves, you will see them in a similar type of turmoil as all the other clubs who are trying to find that perfect manager that can take the team over the line year in, year out. So for now, I have to just say City, title favorites. All right, let's move on to the club I've supported since I was a kid, Chelsea. And the circus continues. My goodness. I mean, if you're a Chelsea fan, you're like the easiest people to troll right now. They go and they spend all this money, £1 billion on players, and the whole project looks like a collage done by a 5-year-old. It's completely insane. This isn't to say that the players they've signed have been bad or poor or whatever, but the overall project around so many of them just does not seem to be working yet. The Pochettino era actually started off pretty well for Chelsea. They went into the U.S. for preseason, won all their games, won the little pre-Premier League tournament or whatever. Christopher Nkunku was scoring, a lot of the new signings were settling in, and you just felt like, oh, Chelsea have turned a corner. Even Mudryk is getting a goal. And obviously the first weekend against Liverpool was always going to be a tough match, and Chelsea were played off the park for the first 20 minutes, but once they equalized, they looked the better team for a good portion of the match, so there really was something good there. But now, the injuries have kicked in. Most notably, Reece James and Christopher Nkunku, but there's also Carney Chukwuemeka. There's also Wesley Fofana. Overall for Chelsea, this is a big issue, and the squad still looks just cobbled together. It's just strange, the chaos at Chelsea right now. Like, the club does not even have a shirt sponsor. I'm not saying that's desperately necessary. The kit actually looks pretty cool, but they were going to use Paramount Plus, and that was a disagreement with NBC and Sky because they're a competitor, and that wasn't going to fly. And when speaking about the transfer window, actually, Chelsea's summer got started really well. Everyone was concerned that they would not be able to offload all these big players that they had on big wages. And then came Saudi Arabia. Arsenal, AC Milan, and Man United helped as well. Chelsea's list of departures is long. There are a lot of players who were released. There are a lot of players who were loaned out. But when you look at the main names, you see Kai Havertz sold for $65 million. Mason Mount sold for over $50. Ethan Ampadu, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, Christian Pulisic, Edouard Mendy, Kalidou Koulibaly. These guys were all sold for a combined profit of £215 million. Now, that was a lot of money brought back, and not many people expected them to do this. But then they went out and just double spent it. And some of these sagas are strange. Moises Caicedo, we know Chelsea were interested all summer long, and that's all well and good. But it took until Liverpool tabled a £100 million offer for Chelsea to just go and spend $20 million more than that. It was bizarre. To wait the whole summer to eventually pay more than what you originally planned is strange. Just pay the money in the first place, get the guy in, and then he's actually training and not getting his first minutes all rusty in a game against West Ham, where he is a clunker. Romeo Lavia, another bizarre case. You have to remember, last summer, Chelsea tried to sign him just 2 weeks after he had joined Southampton from Man City. The deal didn't go through then, and Chelsea waited until now to complete it this time. Christopher Nkunku was the long-anticipated, long-awaited signing. He came in, was looking good in preseason. Bang, injured, out for 4 months. So now what? We'll see if Armando Broja can come back fit anytime soon. And then Robert Sanchez comes in to try and shore up the position of goalkeeper, which since Thibaut Courtois left has been a little bit of a mess. Another trend with Chelsea that will continue is the loan army. When Boehly and Ekbali and Clear Lake Capital took over at first, they were really looking at what signings would make a difference. So they got Raheem Sterling for big money, but they were definitely investing in young players that had a big upside that they didn't have to pay a whole lot for. Carney Chukwuemeka, Cesare Casadei, Gagas Lalina, Andre Santos, David Datro Fofana. Now, these are all interesting young names that were purchased at a low price and could eventually be sold for a solid profit. So does that mean that a lot of these signings are planned to never actually play for the team, to just be bought at low price, loaned a couple places, given a little shine, and then sold for double the money? It seems that might be what they're doing. Apparently, Roman Abramovich was not an idiot after all, right? If you're paying attention to Fabrizio Romano, it's like every single video has something to do with a potential Chelsea signing. Here we go, Chelsea. But the one here we go Chelsea really want is Lukaku gone. It's wild what has happened to the Belgian striker. He was once regarded as a really respectable young guy who just did the best he could, missed some big chances in big games, but still, you liked him, especially when he won the title with Inter. But the way he left Inter, came back to Chelsea for big money, underperformed, then did an interview that basically tossed the club under the bus, and then Inter trying to bring him back this summer, and he goes and talks to Juve, which pissed Inter off to no end. Juve fans then were like, we don't want Lukaku, and Lukaku is clubless. Does not want to go to Saudi Arabia. But if the transfer window in England closes and the Saudi Arabian one goes on another couple weeks, I think that's where he might end up. So where will Chelsea finish? Well, hopefully for me, above 10th. I don't think the top 4 is a realistic goal for Chelsea. I think top 6 is, and it has to be, because they cannot let teams like Brighton, Aston Villa, Brentford, West Ham actually get ahead of them. They've got to be in that top 6 group if they're going to balance the books on all this stuff that they're doing. The pressure is coming because the money spent was so vast, there is no other option but to start winning games. Number 3. Spurs. Another team that is in a quite interesting rebuild era. Harry Kane has just left, which does mark the end of some pretty good times at Spurs. So now they got to move on. And they've got a new manager. Ange Postecoglou, the Australian, who did a very good job at Celtic, is now in the Premier League, and people are really excited because he does come with a good brand and style of play. And so far, they're pretty good. I mean, they just beat Man United, and there was something about that performance that, although they were fragile and definitely gave up chances, they were much more fun to watch than under Mourinho or Conte. The problem for Spurs is there haven't been enough incomings. They filled the void left by Hugo Lloris, signing Guillermo Vicario from Empoli. They signed Dutch defender Vicky van de Ven from Wolfsburg, and they signed James Maddison from Leicester. If he can put up numbers, they really might have something. One other signing, Manor Solomon, he comes in for free from Fulham, the Israeli who scored a couple bangers to announce himself to the world last season. Obviously, the big question for Spurs is who's going to score the goals? I mean, really, who is going to score 10 plus this season? The expectation is it's Richarlison, but he has not shown us yet that he can do that. So it's going to be fascinating. It's also unfortunate for Spurs that they got this £100 million Kane money and they're not really going to be able to spend it on anybody. So in a lot of ways, the pressure at Spurs is pretty low. They're in a new rebuilding phase. They've just lost their major talisman of the last 8 years. And I think mostly fans are just looking for progress, some hope. Number 4. The pretenders, the up-and-comers. These are the teams who are not top 6 sides by name, but are definitely threatening to gatecrash that party. Basically, I think Man City, Arsenal, and Liverpool will easily be in the top 3. Then, Newcastle may finish 4th, but Man United are going to have something to say about that. I don't think Chelsea and Spurs are going to be competing for top 4, but they will definitely compete for 5th and 6th, in my opinion. So where does that leave teams like Brentford, West Ham, Brighton, Aston Villa? I know West Ham had a horrible campaign in the Premier League last season, but they did end up with a European trophy. Brentford continue to take steps forward and somehow are still scoring goals without Ivan Toney. It's phenomenal what Brentford have done. But they are still a newly promoted side. It's tough to see that they can really break into that upper echelon. But Thomas Frank's done a great job. Brighton are, without much doubt, the most exciting team out of all of these. Roberto De Zerbi's style has been lauded since he showed up, and it's quite amazing how much better they are than under Graham Potter. And also, they've just lost their midfield. Alexis McAllister leaves in the summer. Moises Caicedo follows. Levi Colwill's loan from Chelsea ends. He goes back there. And Robert Sanchez is signed by Chelsea. Now, he had become the number 2 anyways, behind Steele. And they have not spent much money considering everyone they've sold. They brought in Mahmoud Daoud from Dortmund, which I think is a very clever signing. Experienced player at the high level, very technically good. And they brought in Joao Pedro from Watford, who has a huge upside. He's a really talented guy, so we'll see how that goes for them. Brighton have just been striking gold. Every single player they bring in seems to just work out beautifully. I mean, the latest is Kaoru Mitoma. How much money are they going to sell him for next year? And the real question is, can all this culminate in a really solid league campaign? Guess what? After 2 days, they're top of the table. And I want to also talk about Aston Villa because Unai Emery has turned things around completely since he got there. It's pretty impressive. They lost 5-1 on the opening day to Newcastle, but completely reversed that goal difference with a 4-0 victory over Everton. They look really good this year. And I think they had a very good summer of signings. They brought in Yuri Tielemans on a free. They brought Pau Torres from Villarreal, Nicolo Zaniolo on a loan from Galatasaray with an option to buy, which is a pretty cool transfer. And they spent big on Moussa Diaby from Bayer Leverkusen. Look, these are big transfers for Aston Villa. And they also brought in Sevilla mastermind Monchi. This is a guy who worked with Unai Emery in the early days when Sevilla were really crushing it. He was building a lot of the team together. So maybe Aston Villa now have a guru that can help them solidify this position that they have in the top half of the table. Number 5, the new rule changes and the clock. So we were warned by the referees, PGMOL, the Premier League, that there would be a lot more stoppage time this season. We're going to be seeing at times 10, 12, 11 minutes of stoppage time. And of course, players have an issue with this. Rafael Varane spoke about it, saying that this is just an extra load, way too much. Mikel Arteta, one of the managers who also chimed in, I'm sure we'll be hearing about this throughout the season. So what's the reason that they're extending the amount of time? Well, basically, a lot of time just gets wasted. And time wasting sucks. I mean, it really is annoying when the ball is only in play for like 52 minutes of the game. And we've already seen some evidence of this. Trent Alexander-Arnold on the opening weekend against Chelsea getting a yellow card for, delaying his throwing for a good bit. And then Tomiyasu at Arsenal got his first yellow card before he got a second and sent off by basically taking 10 seconds to throw the ball in. Now, I don't think this is actually a bad thing on this point because a lot of set pieces, the clock is just drained. Players will do all kinds of things to just milk an extra 3, 4, 5, 10 seconds. And when that happens, say 15, 20 times over the course of the game, that does shave some minutes off the clock. There are also teams who have very systematic approaches to killing time. I remember Southampton last season in games that they were winning. They would purposely have a guy go down around the 60th minute. He would need treatment. He would get up, go off the field, come back on, play for 5 minutes, go down again, need treatment, substitution. At all of these stoppages, the team was able to come together, make a plan, sort out any tactical or personnel changes they needed to. But what was happening is the clock was just disappearing at this point. Now, you can always say this is also to break up play, and guess what? I think breaking up play is not something you can stop, but you can limit the amount of time that just disappears because teams are just deciding not to put the ball in play. And this also comes back to the topic of, do we want a running clock or a 60-minute clock that stops in football? This is a huge debate. This is a big topic. Actually deserves its own video. So I'll see if I can get one of those done soon. So what's another thing that's going to generate yellow cards this season? Dissent. Not just players, managers as well. They're going to clamp down basically on all kinds of surrounding the referee, abuse of the fourth official, and just yelling at the refs in general. Will it stick? That's the big question. A lot of the time these rule changes are brought in, and then by October, November, no one thinks about them anymore. I kind of remember the whole grabbing and jostling and shirt pulling in the box. They were saying that they would really strictly call that like 2 seasons ago, and after 6 weeks, it was just like, we're just going to go back to the way it was before. What's going to happen with this? Is this going to actually change players' behavior? Are they just going to be getting cards like crazy and that's actually going to solve the situation? Finally, number 6, and that's the injuries. I don't think ever in my life I've seen so many injuries happen that are like long-term layoffs. Players have been sounding the alarm for a few years now. FIFA has not listened. The calendar is just as crammed as ever, and it's going to come to a head very soon. Now, before the Women's World Cup, you may have heard a lot about the injuries that a lot of the women were suffering and that high-profile players were dropping like flies and that something needed to be done. Players like Vivienne Miedema and Kristen Press and many members of the England team were saying that if this was happening on the men's side,
we would have immediately seen a reaction.
And that if the game's most prized assets were in jeopardy, they would absolutely step in and help them out.
I mean, imagine having 4 ACLs at Man City this season. There would be a massive thing about it.
That was a complete rubbish narrative then. It is a complete rubbish narrative now. If you go back over the last year, the amount of male players who have also gotten injured, who are high profile, is insane. And already just at the start of this season, there's a bunch of names that are out. Nkunku, Buendia, Reece James, Eder Militao, Thibaut Courtois, Kevin De Bruyne, Jurrien Timber. Now, these are different types of injuries. Some are hamstrings, some are knee, but they're obviously wear and tear injuries. They're fatigue injuries. These are things that happen when you're not fully fit and strong and overworked. So what is being done about this player welfare? Well, we're going to have added time at the end of matches that's going to essentially accumulate to like 3 extra games by the end of the season. There's obviously the Nations League, the international breaks. There's a FIFA Club World Cup in in 2025. There's an expanded Champions League format next year. The schedule just gets more packed. And for us fans who love to watch games, it's great, I guess, but also we do want to see the best players not get injured all the time. But it's concerning to see how many injuries have happened so far, and it's going to be interesting to see if this comes to a head in any way, if the Players Union can force some kind of discussion with the governing bodies. And on the women's side, love the women's game, love the Women's World Cup, but please do stop gaslighting everyone thinking that this does not happen on the men's side. All players, men and women, need to be protected much, much better. Because at the end of the day, if the good ones are gone, the product fails. It's just not as interesting. It's not as good. We want the top players there. So that's it. Those are my 6 questions. There are tons more. If you have anything you want to add, please drop it in the comments section. I'm Sebastian North. This is Campfire Football. Take it easy.